Being a business owner can be frustrating, even infuriating. We can often feel alone and isolated, and it can appear from our vantage point that everyone has it figured out except for us. But is that really true? Stay tuned and I'll share what I think.
Running a service business can be hard. It is not unusual for business owners in industries like contracting, home repair, auto repair, business-to-business services like janitorial, IT and accounting, and many others to feel overwhelmed by all the priorities facing them at any given time. Between addressing the needs of the customers, managing the employees, figuring out the financials, and getting processes in place, feeling like you're making significant progress on your business journey can be difficult. Welcome to Service Industry Success, hosted by Brian Harding. Each week, Brian will look at real-world strategies for building the business you are dreaming of, while also sharing tactics to get through some of the most frustrating parts of business ownership with a lot more ease. Let's get started.
So business owners keep a lot of information to themselves, especially their weaknesses. There's a lot of reasons for this. One, we got to keep a positive attitude around things. Like we have this dream, we have this goal, we have these things we want to do. It wouldn't make a whole lot of sense to walk around talking about how we don't know how to do things a lot, or how frustrating things are, things like that. Like that would get old pretty quickly. So most of us work really hard to keep those kinds of things in check, those kinds of attitudes and behaviors and thoughts and things like that. We try to keep that stuff in check. And it's not very much fun to tell people, hey, I suck at this thing. I wish I knew how to do this thing better. I wish I knew stuff more than I do. Like those are not fun things to talk about, especially if you're like me and have any kind of ego at all, where I kind of like feeling competent with stuff. We also don't have the luxury of extra time. So we don't even have time to complain about these things half the time. We're so busy in the weeds on stuff that we don't have time for that kind of thing. And the people we rely upon most can't share some of this information that would give us some kind of context. CPAs can't say, you're doing better than brand X on your labor or marketing costs. That would be wildly inappropriate, and we wouldn't want them sharing that information about our company with somebody else. So they can't, obviously. Your banker can't tell you oftentimes what other companies do that they like the banker likes, nearly as well as they can tell you what they don't like that you're doing. So these people that we would hope, or when we first start out, especially, have an expectation that these kind of folks would be able to give us information, they really can't. Again, bankers are great at telling you what you're doing wrong. They're not great at saying, well, I wish you would do it like this, because that would be inappropriate. It would be weird for a banker who's, soliciting your business to tell you should be more like this other company. It's not going to go down like that. So because of these things and others, business owners can develop an inaccurate perception of how they and their company are performing relative to others. You might be looking at other business owners who seem to have it all together because they aren't telling you about any of their challenges. Just like all other business owners, just like we just said, we don't walk around talking about our challenges for a variety of reasons, more than ones I covered. But because we don't do that, there's not this feeling that we are all experiencing the same thing. We can very much feel alone because other people aren't talking about these things. We don't hear it being mentioned. And the way our brains work is that tells us that we're the only ones who experience this thing. But I promise you, while you might think the majority of other business owners have it all figured out and or don't have as many problems as you, your assessment on this is probably way off base. I would say the percentage of business owners without problems is 0. Every business owner has some problems. Now, do some have more than others? 100%. People have been in business and have well-developed processes and leadership teams and all the things that we don't have in the beginning. We have 0 of those things in the beginning. And after a certain number of years have passed and our time has passed and lessons have been learned and expensive things have been taught, we put in enough time to get clarity and get procedures and processes and training. We put in time to get this stuff. So eventually, of course, like anything else, eventually we have way fewer problems when we first started out, but it's never 0. And the percentage of business owners who have few problems, I would estimate, I have no scientific basis to back this up. I have no facts I'm quoting here, just my own estimation. Business owners with a few problems or less is 5 or 10%. I mean, a very small percentage of business owners have only a few problems. Again, these are well-developed companies that the business owners have invested tons of time and money and energy and all the things to get past these humps. There's no point. But again, even the number who have just a few, way less than 5 or 10%, I would say. Almost all business owners feel helpless, lost, incompetent, overwhelmed, scared, or unworthy of success. You see, or we see, a peer, we see the guy who's great at sales, but we don't see him struggle with financials. We see our friend who has processes and procedures completely buttoned up. We don't see how she's overwhelmed with personnel issues. We see the business owner who's always busy. We can't see that his accounts receivable is so bad that he can't even get a line of credit. So the way our brains are wired, it seems like we gravitate more towards other people having success and us having failure. That's kind of, it seems to be how our brains work for us. We see somebody else who might even say, I'm really good at sales and I'm not very good at financials. And a month later, all we remember hearing is how they were great at sales. And even though we know we are not good at financials, for example, we don't remember that about those other folks. We paint a much rosier picture of them and a much more negative picture of ourselves. At one time, I heard this. I think it was maybe a psychologist or something like that talking about, forget business for a minute, just talking about in life, we all have our problems. And if you were able to take your problems out of your body and go put them in a pile, and like 100 people did this, and all 100 people put their problems in the same pile, when we saw what everybody else's problems were, we would go grab our problems again. If we had to redistribute the problems, we would go find our problem in the pile, and we would take that one back. And I kind of feel like it's the same way with business. And I wish I remember the context of that story better. That stuck with me. I heard that maybe 20 years ago. It helps me keep it in context. Like, we all have problems in life, but I don't know what somebody else's problems are like. I don't know what they've had to endure that would be crippling for me. I might be blessed, and it's the same. I think it's the same kind of thing in business. When I was a business owner in building my company, there was times where I would look at people and go, man, I wish I had it figured out like that person. Man, I wish I had this, or especially, you've heard me talk about specific struggles I had with marketing. That was one I really wished I could help. I had figured out as well as other people. But even earlier in my career, I didn't understand how to lead a team of people. I didn't understand how processes and procedures worked. I didn't understand financials was. Why? I mean, I had to figure it out. Crash course. I didn't understand it at all. Uh, big time, like risk mitigation and labor law and like all this stuff. I didn't know none of this stuff. Now, in my perspective and what I do now for a living, I see folks who have this crippling fear and doubt and they just have this perception that everyone's got it figured out except for me. Something's wrong with me because I can't figure this out. Something's wrong with me because I don't know this. Listen, running a business is hard. Building a business is very hard. So like running a business, when I say that, like it's hard enough just to maintain what you have. That's hard. Building a business is very hard. It takes a tremendous amount of commitment, grit, ability to overcome failures, vision, like all kinds of skills. It's very hard. Not just for you, for everyone. It's hard for everyone. Now, some of us show that in different ways. But the struggles you see others having is not an accurate representation of how many struggles they are actually having. It's not fair or reasonable to assume that the number of things you see them struggle with is the real number of things they're struggling with. Of course, they're struggling with more things that they're letting on, just like you probably are, just like I did. I mean, what are we supposed to do? We're supposed to walk around and tell everyone? That's certainly not what I did. I mean, there was times where I would have really be struggling with something, I would reach out to somebody I trusted and like, hey, I'm really struggling with this thing. But I didn't walk around just like telling industry peers or people in different kinds of meetings I was at, whether it be a chambers of commerce meeting or industry association meetings. I didn't walk around telling people all the things I sucked at, and they didn't either. And I suspect that's not what you're doing. So I think it's really important here that we just give ourselves some grace. It's not reasonable to expect that we should know all the things that are, by not knowing, are causing us frustration. So let me say that again. It's not reasonable that we should expect to know all the things that are causing us frustration because we don't know. It is not reasonable to expect that the average person should graduate from high school or even college or whatever, knowing all the things it's going to take to run a business. That's not reasonable. There's no person who, it's not like the majority of people were born knowing this stuff. And those of us who weren't born knowing this stuff, there's something wrong with us. We should know this stuff. That's a crazy idea. Now, I know it's easy for me to say sitting here, not in the weeds with whatever you're dealing with today. I get that. But this is a common thing that we all go through. We have this perception that we should know better and we don't. And we're a failure somehow because we don't know better. That is not how this works. The likelihood that a person could be really good at sales and really good at processes and procedures is very, very low. You're naturally going to be good at one of those and not naturally good at the other one. The likelihood a person can be good at sales and financials, very low. Again, you're naturally going to be good at one of those and naturally not going to be good at one of those. We are naturally better suited for either relationship or people stuff, or we're naturally suited for task stuff or process stuff. It's an extremely rare person who's born, with a reasonable a desire and ability to do all those things. We have to learn the things that are hard, and we have to learn even the things we're good at. We have to learn how to enhance those skills, but we have to really buckle down and learn the things that we're not naturally good at, because we have to have at least a working knowledge of all these different components of the business. Like, accounts receivable is different than marketing. Your sales process is different than HR law. Like, all these things are so wildly different, and there's so many of them. I mean, I've never written down a list, but I'll bet there's probably 30 different kinds of things that go into running a business by the time you figure out, purchasing and human resource stuff and all the stuff we've talked about already, sales and operations and safety, and there's probably 30 different things. How could a person be born knowing all that stuff? It's not reasonable. So, long-winded way of saying, give yourself some grace. It's not reasonable to expect that you should know all the things that you're frustrated that you don't know, or are causing you grief because you don't know. The idea you should know this stuff is ludicrous. The only way you learn this stuff is to learn this stuff. And the only way you learn is through mistakes or mentors. That's it. It's that simple. The only way you learn is to learn, and the only way you learn is mistakes or mentors. There's no other secret thing. There's no gift that everybody else was given that we weren't. I didn't know or was terrible at every one of the things I now help people with. Every one of them I was either terrible at or didn't know at all. But I learned. I had great mentors. I made a ton of expensive mistakes, which you've heard lots about. So you probably think others are miles ahead of you or have things figured out a lot more than you do. And I can assure you that these people who appear to you to have it all figured out, they may have different struggles than you. They may have the exact same struggles as you and just not be willing to share when you bring up your struggles, because they have the same insecurities that you do, or I do for sure. I don't know about you, but they may not be willing to share that stuff when you bring it up because they have insecurities. I promise you, all those people you were looking at as the ones who have it all figured out are looking at you, or people like you, wishing they had it figured out as well as you do. So we're not alone in this. It's one of the most paradoxical things I've learned in my new role over the last several years, is that business owners have many, many, many of the same shared problems, and simultaneously, each one of them feels completely alone and isolated. It's almost not possible that this is the way it is, but it's 100% the way it is. Simultaneously, we all feel alone, and that we're the only ones who don't get it, and nobody else can understand our situation because they are obviously gifted people who were just born with this knowledge. They couldn't possibly understand what it's like to be a dope like me who can't figure this stuff out. And we're all thinking the same thing. It's one of the most interesting parts of this, of the perspective I have now. And so I know I don't talk about this kind of stuff a lot. We more usually we get into more problems to solve and things like that. I thought on a whim, every 133 episodes or so, I'm going to talk about something a little more uplifting and not dive into a problem. I think this is a critical perspective for us to keep, because when things get hard, we can get down on ourselves. When we're down on ourselves, we can't be productive. We can't be as good leaders. We start thinking negatively, we attract more negativity. That's just the way it works. So we've got to have the perspective to allow ourselves the grace and the knowledge, objectively knowing these are not accurate perceptions we have. I promise you, all those other businesses you're looking at, business owners you're looking at, wish they had it figured out as well as you or somebody just like you. All right, my ask for this episode is if you find the information I share helpful, please share this podcast with a friend or colleague who you think could benefit. Of course, public sharing is appreciated also, but maybe this episode is one that you think a business owner could get some benefit out of. Hey, you don't have to feel alone. Listen to this guy. He's talking about how we all feel the same thing. So if you find the information I share helpful, please share this podcast with a friend or colleague who you think could benefit. And that's it for this week, and I'll talk to you all next week.